Before banners were raised and armies assembled, the lands between Arabia and Byzantium moved to an older rhythm. In the markets of Syria, merchants weighed silk and spices to the soft chime of bells. In Anatolian monasteries, oil lamps flickered before painted icons of Christ. Across the Arabian Peninsula, tribes followed seasonal paths guided by stars far older than any empire. The Mediterranean shimmered as it had for centuries, still, in many ways, a Roman sea watched over by the heirs of Constantine. Yet change was already on the horizon. What happens when a new faith, born in revelation and unity, encounters an ancient empire sustained by tradition, theology, and military power? When two universal visions step into the same historical moment, the first great military encounter between Muslims and Christians did not begin as an inevitable clash. It grew out of exhaustion, ambition, belief, and the fragile balance of power. In the early 7th century, the Eastern Mediterranean was dominated by what we call today the Byzantine Empire, the continuation of Rome in the east. From Constantinople, its emperors ruled territories, stretching from the Balkans to Egypt. The state was sophisticated and deeply rooted, disciplined armies, elaborate administration, and a public life shaped by Christianity. Greek filled the streets and courtrooms, while Roman law still echoed through its institutions. But beneath the gold mosaics and marble columns, Byzantium was tired. For decades, it had fought a devastating war with the Sasanian Persian Empire. Cities were lost and retaken. Resources were drained. Fields went uncultivated, taxes rose, and disease spread through crowded provinces. When Emperor Heraclius finally forced Persia into peace in 628, the victory ensured survival, but left the empire strained and vulnerable far to the south. Another transformation was unfolding. In the city of Mecca, a merchant named Muhammad began preaching a message centered on monotheism, moral responsibility, and unity beyond tribal divisions. After years of resistance and migration to Medina, he established a community defined not by lineage, but by shared belief. By 632, much of Arabia had been unified under Islam. When Muhammad died that same year, the young community faced uncertainty. Leadership passed to the first caliph, Abu Bakr, who suppressed internal revolts in the Ridda Wars and held Arabia together. Rather than fragmenting, the new polity emerged more cohesive and soon turned outward. The frontier between Arabia and Byzantine Syria was not an empty wasteland. It had long been a zone of exchange, trade, and occasional conflict. Arab tribes allied to Byzantium guarded its southern approaches. Caravans moved between cities like Mecca and Damascus. Raiding and skirmishing were familiar features of frontier life. But this moment was different. Under the second caliph, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Muslim forces advanced northward in sustained campaigns. These were not isolated incursions, but organized operations. Syria, wealthy, strategic, and deeply embedded in the Christian world, became the focal point. The decisive moment came in 636 near the Yarmouk River. The Battle of Yarmouk would prove to be more than a military engagement. It marked a turning point. Byzantine forces assembled from across the empire, Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and Christian Arabs, carrying with them centuries of Roman military tradition. They believed they were defending both territory and a sacred order. Opposing them were Muslim armies led by commanders such as Khalid ibn al-Walid. Their forces were smaller and drawn from recently unified Arabian tribes, but they were cohesive and highly mobile, shaped by the demands of desert warfare and a powerful shared identity. 4 days, the battle shifted across the plains. Each side tested the other in strategy, endurance, and resolve. Then, amid confusion and changing conditions, Byzantine formations faltered. What had been a contest became a withdrawal. When it ended, Byzantine authority in Syria was irreparably weakened. Damascus fell. Jerusalem followed. Egypt would soon be lost as well. Within a decade, regions that had been part of the Roman and Christian world for centuries came under Muslim rule. Historians now see these events as the opening phase of the Arab-Byzantine Wars. The transformation was not driven by battlefield success alone. It was administrative as well as military. The early caliphate governed pragmatically. Existing tax systems were maintained. Local officials, often Greek or Coptic-speaking Christians, continued their work. Christians and Jews were recognized as people of the book, permitted to practice their faith in exchange for taxation. For many provincial inhabitants, worn down by decades of war and imperial demands, the transition could feel less abrupt than expected. Still, it was undeniably a conquest. Land ownership shifted. Political authority changed hands. Some churches were repurposed or shared. Arabic gradually replaced Greek in administration. New coins circulated. A different political and religious framework took hold for ordinary people. History was experienced not as grand strategy, but as uncertainty. A farmer near Damascus might see one army whose requisition supplies 1 year, and another arrives the next. A monk in Jerusalem, long devoted to copying scripture, suddenly lived under rulers who honored Jesus as a prophet but understood him differently. A young Arab tribesman, once defined by clan loyalty, now found himself part of an expanding state that reached far beyond Arabia. Gain and loss unfolded together. As Muslim rule expanded, new cities such as Kufa and Fustat were founded. Trade routes shifted toward the Arabian heartlands. The Mediterranean, long dominated by Rome, became a contested space shared by rival powers. For Byzantium, the shock was profound. The empire contracted, consolidating around Anatolia as its defensive core. Its identity grew more distinctly Greek and more closely bound to Orthodox Christianity. The loss of the Levant and Egypt, region central to its economy and theology, reshaped Byzantine life for generations. The global consequences were equally significant. The rapid Muslim conquests disrupted the centuries-old balance between Rome and Persia. The Sasanian Empire soon collapsed. Within a few decades, a vast Islamic realm stretched from the Atlantic to Central Asia. Ideas traveled alongside commerce and governance. Greek philosophical works were translated into Arabic, studied, and expanded upon. Trade networks connected distant regions. Artistic and architectural traditions blended influences from Roman, Persian, and Arabian worlds. Yet expansion also introduced new tensions. Disputes over leadership within the Muslim community led to civil wars and the enduring Sunni-Shia divide. Byzantium launched periodic counteroffensives. Frontier zones hardened into militarized borders. Debates unfolded not only on battlefields, but in theology, law, and culture. Christian thinkers wrote critiques of Islam. Muslim scholars developed legal and political frameworks for ruling a diverse empire. Identity sharpened, defining communities in new ways. Centuries later, these early struggles would echo during the Crusades, when Latin Christian armies marched eastward, inspired in part by memories of lands lost long before. But history resists simple narratives. The first sustained conflict between Muslims and Christians was not born of inevitable hostility. It arose from geopolitical strain, sudden unification in Arabia, and the vulnerability of an overstretched empire. Religion offered meaning. Strategy provided direction. Circumstances created opportunity. The legacies of those 7th century encounters still shape the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean today. Boundaries, demographics, and cultural landscapes all bear traces of that transformation. The Byzantine Empire would endure for centuries, adapting repeatedly until its fall in 1453. The civilization that emerged from Arabia would fragment into multiple dynasties, yet remain a central force in world history. What began along the Yarmouk was not the end of one world, but the emergence of several, overlapping, interacting, and often competing. A witness standing on that plain in 636 would not have seen modern geopolitics, only dust, uncertainty, and men praying in different languages under the same sun. Yet in that moment, trajectories changed. Civilizations are not fixed monuments. They evolve, confront one another, and adapt. The encounter between early Islam and Byzantium reshaped both societies, creating new centers of power, new intellectual traditions, and enduring memories. We still live with those inheritances. When we speak of East and West, of Christian and Muslim worlds, we are echoing distinctions sharpened in that era. Yet we also inherit the exchanges that followed, the science, philosophy, and art that crossed boundaries even in times of conflict. This story is not one of simple victory or loss. It is a story of transformation. Empires rise and fall. Faith traditions endure. Identities continue to evolve. And across the plains of Yarmouk, the wind still moves, indifferent to the banners that once filled the horizon.